This is one of the more, let's say, quirky reviews I've done on my channel. This grinder, the Sniper, was sent to me by MHW-3Bomber, and it's the first product of theirs that I have used and reviewed. And in some respects, I've been very impressed by it, and in others, a little confused, maybe. Couple small frustrations here and there, but I see what they're trying to do here. Now, MHW-3Bomber is a Chinese company, and they popped up, for me at least, about a year or two ago, let's say. It's kind of starting out with some of this barista tool type stuff, like shot glasses, milk pitchers, that kind of thing. They have this very interesting constant pressure tamper. Now, some of their stuff was a little derivative, but definitely not what I would call, you know, a blatant ripoff type thing either that you can sometimes see online. Now, before we get into stuff, a quick overview. It uses a 48mm conical burr. We're going to come back to that. And it also uses a DC motor, and we're also going to come back to that. I couldn't find an RPM spec for this, but based on my measurements, I was getting about 140 RPM from the grinder. The fit and finish is really nice. It's a little bit hard to interpret the spec that they have on their Amazon page, etc. But from what I can tell, this is, I think, a cast aluminum body. Like, it feels very heavy duty. It's got this nice finish, all metal. Feels great, very pleasant to interact with. One thing I did particularly like is almost everything on here is magnetized in some way. You know, you have the dosing cup right here, you have the grind chute right here, you have the cap here, it's all held on with magnets. Even this grind size indicator ring, it's magnetized on here to kind of keep it in place, which, you know, all that makes for like a very like satisfying, clicky user experience. It comes with 3 caps, so you have a metal one, you have a clear plastic one if you want like a little window in there. You have a wood one, which matches the wood accent on the back. It also comes with this kind of beefy brush, which is pretty nice, and this little blower to kind of clean things out. And this is kind of funny. This blower has Bernoulli's equation printed on it. And I'm sure a lot of people are gonna have no idea what that is, but if you're a physics person, you're having a little chuckle with this. And that is just the kind of quirky, obscure thing that leaves me scratching my head a little bit with this brand every now and again. So let's talk about, I guess, my first question. And that is with the brand name, MHW-3Bomber. Now, I don't know if that rolls off the tongue, maybe a little bit easier in Chinese. If you're a native speaker, maybe you can give me a yes or no on that one, but it's kind of a weird name, and it's plastered on like everything. All their pictures, all their gear, it's all got this very prominently stamped somewhere on there. And then they have this little plane logo that kind of goes on, this bomber plane, and you know, the name of the grinder, the Sniper, it's kind of got this military motif going on. And when I tell my buddies about the grinder that I'm using, I kind of feel like, you know, I should be wearing a headset and playing Call of Duty with them or something. Like, it's just a very unusual choice. Now, if you can get past that, there's a lot of things that are really nice about this grinder. It is a slower RPM, which has some advantages. And on paper, it's a stepless grinder. You know, you can kind of, it does click, but you can set it in between the clicks. Anytime you kind of have that stepless in between zone, I still kind of refer to it as a stepped grinder, but the option is there. The hopper size, it's a little too tight for massive batch brews, but it's going to be more than adequate for any kind of daily single serve pour over or espresso. You are going to want to make sure you use this lid though to kind of prevent some pretty extreme popcorning when it's finishing up on its dose. Now the sound, it's a little high pitched, but I wouldn't call it a terribly loud grinder by any stretch. Retention on the whole is fairly low. I just ground up 18 grams on espresso settings, and yeah, I've got 17.5 grams out. So that's pretty typical for what I've been seeing is 0.5 grams of retention. In my experience, most of that is kind of just stuck in this grind chute. So, you know, if you tap it, give it a little slap or whatever, you can kind of dislodge a lot of that and get it down to about 0.2 grams of retention. That's typically what I've been seeing. Now, when you're doing filter, it tends to be about 0.2 grams of retention all the time without bellows, RDT, anything like that. For me, that's at about 60% relative humidity. The motor gives good torque. I didn't really struggle with light roast at all. And I did try and kind of kill this grinder by putting some green coffee through it, and it did stall eventually, but I couldn't get it to, you know, strip the drivetrain or anything like that. So that was good. Now, brewing with this grinder, I'm gonna put all my data down in the description as well if you want to check it out. But first, I do kind of struggle with these taller dosing cup designs. You know, I find it a little tricky sometimes to actually see in there and see if all your grounds are kind of out of there. And sometimes grounds get stuck in there and they're a bit hard to get out. But as far as taste profile goes, I was very pleasantly surprised. On filter coffee, you know, I was kind of thinking I might get this more high body, not a lot of clarity type profile, but it was a lot more open of a taste profile than I expected. That acidity was able to kind of step forward, and it was very clear tasting as well. And espresso was very similar. So let's taste a shot. All right, so I just pulled this one. They recommend like 20 to 40 on the grind settings. I was on the finer end of that spectrum. You know, I was about 17 on that one, and I might even go a little bit finer. I did find that the sweet spot is kind of wide and open. So as long as you're somewhere close, you know, it's very forgiving. And in terms of shot timing, it's about 2 seconds or so difference in your shot timing per click. And just like on the filter cups, it's a very open taste. You know, that acidity can kind of step forward. You still get some good silkiness on that shot, but it's not like overpowering body without any clarity as well. So, you know, overall, that's really great. Now on filter, they recommend between, you know, 70 to 100 on the grind. And again, I was definitely on the very fine end of that spectrum. And one kind of weird quirk with this grinder is when you're grinding that coarse, once you get to 60, you're actually at 0 again. So to go to 70, you got to go kind of back 1+ rotation and do some math. So, you know, it's not the most seamless thing, but it's not a huge deal either. So as far as taste profile goes, it's great. It's actually better than I would have expected. And that is due to the 48mm Burr that is inside here, which I said we were going to come back to. And now it's time for some very interesting consumer education. This was fascinating for me. Right here, I have a Time More Burr from one of their hand grinders. It is a 38mm Burr. And right here, I have a 40mm Baratza Burr. Now, as you might expect, the 40mm Baratza Burr is just slightly larger than the 38mm Time More Burr. Now, this is the 48mm Burr from the Sniper. Is very surprising because you were probably expecting this burr to be about 25% larger than either of the other ones, but actually it's a little bit functionally smaller than the 40mm Baratza Burr and almost exactly the same size as the 38mm Time More Burr. Now, what is happening here? So first of all, burr geometry is very complex. You have 3 different burrs here, all with very different geometries. And the way they measure burr size makes comparing them by spec alone very difficult to do. And that's because generally, conical burr size are measured by the outer diameter of the outer burr housing, which actually has very little to do with the size of the cutting surface of the burr itself. The danger here when you're shopping for a conical burr grinder is ranking them based on the burr size. You know, it would be tempting to think, larger burr, better grinder. For example, the Varia VS3 has a 38mm burr by its stated size, and I haven't tested that grinder, but based on what I'm seeing here is a lot more similar to this grinder at 48mm than you might expect. So a little bit of education there. Bigger burr size on paper doesn't always translate to a functionally bigger or necessarily better burr, which leads me to kind of another kind of confusing for me choice about this grinder. And that is this absolutely giant power adapter. Now this thing is over like 6 feet long, and I kind of understand what they're doing here. You know, by using an external power supply, they're saving a lot of administration overhead by kind of avoiding some of the regulatory approvals that are needed to sell this grinder in different geographies with different power supplies. Instead of redesigning the whole grinder, they just drop in a new pre-approved power supply. Now, DC motors also tend to be a little bit more expensive than their AC equivalents, so how that's actually coming out in terms of the price, I'm not sure. Bottom line is, most people aren't going to care about that. They're just going to realize that they have no idea what to do with this huge power adapter once they get it on their counter. I guess if you have a coffee cart, coffee bar where you can kind of hide underneath, it might not be a huge deal for you, but for me, I don't really have that luxury. It's going to be sitting right there on my counter. And my last point of confusion about this grinder is how it's positioned. MHW-3Bomber has put this grinder at an incredibly competition dense price point of $400. Now at that price point, you have the DF64 Gen 2 at the same price. You have the Varia VS3 Gen 2 coming in at a little bit less. You have the Lagone Mini coming in at the same price, albeit in a smaller form factor that doesn't have as much of kind of an appliance vibe. And then you also have the Baratza Encore ESP and Fellow Opus at about half the price actually. Now both of those are a little bit more kind of plasticky, but they do a decent job on filter and espresso as well. So on one hand, I was very impressed and I have a lot of pluses about this grinder. I was very pleased with the cup quality on both filter and espresso. The build quality of all the components in the body and the interior feel very premium, high quality, low retention. It's got some good stuff going for it. But on the flip side, I feel like the positioning of this grinder may make it difficult to achieve that kind of runaway success status. One thing I do love about the company though is it's almost like refreshingly quirky. You don't really get why they're doing what they do. You don't get the name. They have equations printed on their accessories. They're not afraid to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. I always like that when I see that. They just released this new direct lever which uses a rack and pinion system to kind of make it easier to pull down. Is it going to work? I have no idea, but I find it very interesting. And then I went on their website the other day, and with no fanfare, they had posted this image of kind of this fantastic looking, I guess, spring lever espresso machine. And it's like, they haven't said anything about it. There's just this image on their website, and you wonder like, is that real? Is that a product? I can't find anything about it. They've just kind of thrown it out there, and it makes me feel like I don't know what that is, but I kind of want to try it. It's just a kind of like quirky decision that makes me kind of smirk a little bit as I'm kind of watching this brand from the sidelines. But I want to know what you think. Do you own some MHW-3Bomber gear? How's your experience been with it? Do you have a Sniper? I would love to hear your thoughts on the Sniper. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic. Do let me know what you want to see from me next on the channel. And until next time, happy brewing.